Alright friends, we are plowing through Unity questions, and we got a follow-up question from our frequent caller Kaya, who asked if she can use a Magica voxel model as her waypoint and still have it change color. It's a little trickier than the technique we showed in the previous video, but believe it or not, we aren't even going to have to change code for this one. So for this question, I'm going to jump out of Unity and I'm going to head on over into Magica Voxel just so I can show you right from the beginning how you can bring in a model called an OBJ from Magical Voxel and make this technique work for your waypoints. So let me bring up Magica, which I do have on my system here. Here we go. Give it a run, and I'm just going to use one of the built-in models, one of the demo models that we get, since this is not a full modeling tutorial here. Alright, so here's our Magica Voxel. Let me expand that up here. And over to the right, you've got a bunch of built-in models that we can use. I like this one called the Knight right here, the character Knight. Now, if I start to navigate around here, you'll notice, first of all, that this OBJ, this model, is actually taking up more room than it needs to inside of here. And the reason why is because of these settings that we have up here where we see 20, 21, 20. And this is basically indicating, you know, how many voxels that we can place inside the model here. But there's a nice way of trimming it down to size. If we just over here under the tool menu here, we click on fit, you can see that it's going to you know, cut down that box. Now that box is like 18 by 8 by 15, and it actually fits much more closely than it did previously. So we're in a pretty good position now to actually export this model. So what you're looking for, if you expand this export menu right down here, the specific model that you're going for is called an OBJ. Now, Unity's got support for several different types of 3D models. Just know that internally what it's going to do is convert it into something called an FBX. So if you are working in any kind of modeling application that has the option to export an FBX, that's probably your best choice, but an OBJ will work just fine. So I'm going to click on the OBJ, and maybe I'll just put this on my desktop right here. So I'm going to click on my desktop, and I'm going to make a new folder that I'll just call the Knight. There we go. And I'm going to save my OBJ into there. Now we're pretty much done with Magic Voxel at this point, so I can close that down. But let's take a quick look inside the folder here, because you'll notice in my Knight folder that there's actually several files in here. So we've got the OBJ itself, that's our model information, but then we've also got this material, the .mtl, and the .png, which is the texture. Now the way these three things work together is that the OBJ defines all the vector 3's in here, all of the points that define this mesh. Then the PNG is going to be the texture, which is kind of like the skin that gets pulled across that mesh. And the material is going to define properties like things like, you know, how light should react off of that skin. Or if it was like a physics material, how, you know, it should physically interact with the world. Now it's important to notice that these three things all need to come along here. So let's go back into Unity, and we're going to import this model here. Now what I like to do, I like to have a folder called meshes, and I'll just go ahead and drag from my desktop that model right into my meshes folder. So here's the Knight. I'm going to grab all three of these files. I'm just going to drag and drop them right in there. And you'll notice, this used to be a bit of a problem with Unity, but you'll notice it does a pretty good job now of actually applying these textures directly to the models. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is drag this model into my scene, and I'm actually going to turn this model into a waypoint and demonstrate the fact that we can have it change color when I pass through it. So just by way of reminding ourselves here, if I run the game, you can see I've got these kind of little pink balls lying here, and if I move through one, boom, it changes it into red, and then that makes it my waypoint that I can reset to, just like that. So we want the same behavior happening, but this time we want it happening with this knight. So I'm going to take this waypoint I've got here and just kind of drag it out of the way so it's not getting in the middle of things. Then I'm going to grab this textured knight and I'm going to bring it into the scene. Now you can see right away that this thing is massive, right? But that's not really a problem. What I want to point out here is that if you look carefully inside the hierarchy, you can see that we've got this CHR knight inside the hierarchy, but if you expand it, there's a second CHR knight inside of there. And this is the one that we have to actually be concerned about. The outer one is just a game object. The inner one is the one that is actually getting rendered in here. So if we're applying our waypoint script to the outer one, nothing is really going to happen. In fact, we're going to get an error because the outer one is just an empty game object. You can see over here in the inspector, there's really nothing listed out. So when it tries to, when our code tries to talk to the renderer and say turn red, well, it's going to have a problem. But if we take that same code and we put it here on the knight itself, then we're in business. So let me go to my assets here. I'm going to grab my waypoint controller, drag it over, and drop it onto the inner object here of the knight. There we go. And yeah, let's see here. So I think that's probably all we need to do, but let's give it a try. Oh no, sorry, that is not all we need to do, because currently this thing doesn't have any collider, right? Without a collider, it's not going to be able to trigger the code with the collision. So we're going to have to, once again, make sure we're on the inner one. We're going to click on the add component. We're going to go to the physics, and I'll give it a box collider. And you can see it does a pretty good job, actually, of applying this box collider exactly around the outside of this knight. Now I'm going to shrink it down a little bit because I don't need it to be that big. So let me just go to my collider here, and first I'm going to shrink it down in the Z position. Just make that a little bit thinner, something like that. Then I'm going to go ahead and shrink it down in the X position. There we go, so it's kind of tight. And yeah, the rest I'll just leave alone. So that looks pretty good. And then I think we're ready to go ahead and test it. So let's hit the play button. And so I am missing one thing, and you might be able to guess what it is. Let me go ahead and start moving forward, and you'll see, boom, I make contact and I can't go anywhere, right? And that's because this model is much bigger than me, and I'm colliding with it, and my mass is not sufficient to knock it over, so nothing's happening. Now what we have to do is go to our collider and check off the is trigger, because if you take a look in your code here, it is the trigger enter, not the collision enter, that we are using to determine that you've intersected a waypoint here. So let's check off the is trigger. We'll give it another try. Let's see what we got. And just like that, totally works. And if I reset, it's going to reset me back to the position of my magic of voxel. Pretty good, right? Now, if we need to resize this, a couple little extra tips for you. We don't want to necessarily resize the inner one here. If we click on the outer one, and we go to our resizing tool right here. Now, first tip I would say is like to scale uniformly, make sure you're selecting that little inner box inside of there. And you can just scale it all down, just like that. And now that looks like more like what I would expect my waypoint to be. Let's give it another try and make sure it still works. There we go, moving ahead, and boom. Totally works. Whoa! Fall off the world, and I can respawn back at that waypoint. And the cool thing is that the other waypoints that I have in the game will also work, even though they are not Magic of Voxel models. So that, my friend, I believe answers your question, and hopefully that technique is going to work for you. Let me know if you have any problems. Just jump into the Discord server and pose a question. Alright, Timbot out.